Today I want to talk briefly about ethics and professional obligations within certain professions that have a high degree of influence on society. These particular professions would include things like those in the medical field, engineering, military, law enforcement, theological fields. These are people in professions that once again have a large influence on society around them. And it is especially incumbent upon them because of this greater responsibility to society at large that they keep the following obligations in mind as they go about their profession. Those who are engaged in this way need to remember that their primary obligation professionally is to society at large, that they serve the public at large and the public and societal interest before anything else. And I want to give you an example of this and why this is critical. I was reading recently of a lawyer who was employed by a particular individual who happened to be a businessman in a community, highly regarded and respected. He was in a custody battle with his estranged wife. They were in the process of getting divorced for custody of their child, a little girl. Now, in the process of this custody battle, there was some allegations brought by the mother against the father of sexual abuse of the daughter. And they asked the daughter, and she was very forthright about things that daddy did. And anyway, as they were going through this defense lawyer referred this client, who was once again well respected. The mother unfortunately was in drug rehab and therefore not believed. He referred his client to someone who could take a polygraph, a lie detector test essentially. During that interview, the father confessed that he had been in fact sexually abusing the daughter. But because the defense lawyer had asked for this polygraph, it was inadmissible in court unless the defense lawyer wanted to bring it up. And of course, he's not going to bring up something that's condemning his client. Although in this case, if he had followed professional obligations as he ought to, he would have immediately, under one, thought of the society and public at large's needs, and that was not to allow this man who was sexually abusing his daughter to continue doing so. It would have brought in number two, that even though he was a client and was employed by this man for his defense, that there would have been a conflict of interest there. I cannot be your lawyer knowing what I know now about what you have done to your daughter, and I'm going to make sure that this information gets out somehow so that you can be properly dealt with by the law. It was a very sad case where this particular lawyer, as a defense lawyer, just wanted to serve his client employer, wanted to win the case, and therefore suppress that information, and unfortunately he won. The dad got custody of this child and continued to molest her beyond this point. It's a horrific story, but it points out the importance, the critical importance of professional obligations and ethics, that as a professional, whether in engineering, law, medical practice, military, law enforcement, clergy, theological pursuits, that you serve first and foremost. Your primary obligation is to society and public at large. After that obligation is met, the second most important obligation you have is to your client and or employer. And under that, we want to think about the following three things. As you do your best in your profession to serve your client, to serve your employer, you need to make sure you're competent at what you do. I am able to perform the duties for which you have hired me. So competency is important. Next, they need to know that they can trust you. I've hired you to do a job. I need to make sure that you are not going to disclose proprietary information to those we're in competition with. So along with your competence, non-disclosure of proprietary information. Someone may come to you from another company, from a competitor, and say, hey, I noticed you were working on this. What can you tell us? We'll offer you money for that information. Proper professional obligations and ethics would indicate, one, I have to serve the public good first, but second, I am hired by this particular person. I am their employee. They are my client. And I will not ethically go against them no matter how much money I'm offered. So I will not disclose proprietary information. And then finally, being forthright with whoever employs you and saying there is a conflict of interest here and I cannot in good conscience serve you, as that lawyer should have done to the man in pursuit of the custody of his daughter who he was also molesting. So a disclosure of conflict of interest, saying I cannot serve this function anymore, being forthright enough to admit that. And then finally, after you've met your obligation to society and public, your next obligation to your client employer, all professionals have an obligation to their profession and to their colleagues in that profession. Whatever you can do that promotes your profession, builds it up, elevates it, brings it into light in society in a good form or fashion ought to be done. And the same token, you ought to avoid things that bring that profession into disrepute, that cause people not to trust people in that profession, not to look to them for help or for whatever it is because of your actions. So you have a professional obligation to your profession itself and to your fellow professionals, to your colleagues. You don't want to do anything that's damaging or harming to them as well. So this hierarchy fits all sorts of professions, but especially those in places of influence in society. First and primary of importance to society at large and the public. Second, whoever your employer is or your client, be competent, don't disclose proprietary information, but be upfront about conflict of interest. And finally, do what you can to promote your profession and to help your fellow colleagues. I hope this has been helpful to go over this. It's extremely important. It promotes trust, goodwill, and brings great good to culture and society at large. If you'd like to learn more about this and related things, there's a link underneath this video. Click on it, it'll take you to that web page. And while you're there, you'll find a link on that web page to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.